Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Summit Series. This is our first session of the 2022 calendar year, and we hope that all of your years are getting off to a fantastic start. We genuinely appreciate your being here, your interest and your engagement with us at Payments Canada, and truly appreciate your welcoming us into your offices, your living rooms, or whichever space you've appropriated for a working space. My name is Ryan Grundy. I'm the lead of industry relations for Payments Canada, and I'll be your host for today's webinar, which will touch upon the future of modern payments. As always, we'll be starting off with a roundtable discussion, but we'll make sure that we save about 10 minutes at the end of the session to answer your questions. So please feel free to use the Ask the Speaker box on the right side of the screen, and we'll try to cover as many of your questions as we can. Coming out of another year of accelerated transformation across the payments ecosystem, we thought this would be a good opportunity to reflect on that change and prepare for an exciting future. And joining me today is a star-studded panel to talk about what's next for modern payments. We've got Edgar Barbosa, Beyo, Andrew McFarlane, and Ryan Rabin. And I'll turn the microphone over to them to provide a brief introduction, and then we'll dive into some questions. So Edgar, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you for having me. So Edgar Barbosa, I'm a partner with PwC Canada, and I am our Canadian payments leader. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about what some of these trends and changes in the payments industry is going to prompt out of our clients and how we help them navigate the constant change that is occurring in our industry these days. So fascinating job, and again, happy to be here to speak with you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Edgar. How about you, Michelle?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Very happy to be here today as well. My name is Beyo. I'm the CEO and founder of FINAVATOR, as well as I am a board member at Open Banking Initiative Canada. And I spend my days working with fintechs and banks to help them work closely together as we drive modernization and innovation across North America. Very passionate about data portability and giving the consumer and the SME the ability to be in charge of their destiny and their data.
Very nice. Thank you, Michelle. How about you, Ryan?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Ryan, for the great introduction. I'm Ryan Rabin. I lead our payment product solutions at ATB Financial. Part of the mandate is also our card operations, multiple operation areas, and the big bad modernization that impacts all of us. So I champion that on behalf of our enterprise, ensuring that all the policy regulations and our technical constructs are meeting the demands of our modernization efforts. Good morning, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. And last but not least, Mr. Andrew McFarlane.
Hey guys, Andrew McFarlane. I've been in Canada since 2017. Came across from Ireland to work with Payments Canada, and have been delighted on the journey. My grand title is I'm the Chief External Relations Officer for PayCan. But what that means is that I handle the relationships with the regulators, with our stakeholders, and with the industry, and also very importantly, the marketing comms and our policy function. So Ryan, delighted to be here today and looking forward to a great discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you all for being here once again on behalf of myself and everyone at Payments Canada. So we'll dive into our first question now. Like many of us, 2021 was a pivotal year, particularly for us at Payments Canada. We had a few key milestones, specifically the delivery of Links, which is our country's new high-value payment system, which helped to bring us into a new era of payments. We've also made significant strides towards broader access when the Retail Payments Activities Act, or RPAA, was included in the 2021 federal budget with support from the Department of Finance. But as the landscape evolves rapidly, the fundamentals of what Canadian consumers and businesses want remain the same: fast, frictionless, and secure payment options. So first question we have for the panel is, how do you envision modern payments in 2022? And we'll start with Ryan.
Ryan, thank you. Modern payments in 2022 is going to really start to set the stage. But if we have to kind of back it up a little bit, Ryan, because we've really been on this journey for the last number of years, really, when we started in 2016 and 2017 with the vision from Payments Canada and what it takes for our ecosystem to evolve. And now, after all of these years of progression, we're getting to that point where we're at the enabler point. We've now set the technical construct of what we need, whether it's through the ecosystem at the center, whether it's for all the FIs, whether it's for all the tech partners around the table. We've set that footprint at this point. So we're enabling our ecosystem to evolve. And this year actually is the real milestone year. You could say that adding additional exchanges in the past were great, but now we're moving into links coming up. We're moving into this this data aspect. We're moving into an aspect where we have ubiquity of our standards, and those standards translate into data and interoperability into the global aspect. And we're looking at those regulations, those bylaws, and access frameworks, which are all of these enablers for it. I think we'll find in 2022 the start of a major shift, because without having all of the platforms available, we're sort of catching up and getting to that point where we can accelerate beyond. So we'll see a major shift starting with links coming up later this year, with the MX, with the data sets, with additional exchanges that happen that supply data and data quality. We'll start to see some client value being extracted from what those look like. And we'll start to see this shift from what I would call a micro environment into a macro environment. Less painful, tell me how to move money, less painful structures, into a more global view of automation, capacities that will help evolve the roles that we have within a corporate treasurer, maybe a controller. Even us as consumers, we start to elevate ourselves from just day-to-day transactions, pay this, do that, do this, into a more automated fashion. All of that is enabled by this footprint that we're collectively as an ecosystem been setting over the last number of years. And this year, 2022, boom, we start to go up. From here on end is where we start to go up. And yes, we've got to get policy right. We've got to get access. We've got to get all of these parts right for our ecosystem. But at least our footprint and those enablers are those hooks that will allow us to accelerate into the future.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Ryan. Edgar, I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of envisioning modern payments in the year 2022.
Thank you, Ryan. And also a lot of great points that Ryan Rabin brought forth. I think, I also want to take a little bit of a step back, because one of the things that I really think about when I think about modern payments is I think about the industry role in fostering financial inclusion, right? At the core of that is payments. And then how we're continuing in this trend where payments is a focal point into the development of the digital economy, right? And at no point in time has that been accelerated at a more exponential fashion than during the pandemic, right? And so obviously the usage and trends, the latest release of that document shows how much we've moved away from cash and into digital payments. And, I think from a global perspective, our recent research indicates that sort of about $1 trillion of digital payments that exist today is going to move into an area of 2 to 3 trillion between 2025 and 2030, right? So immense growth there. The other part is this kind of concept of where are we? Is it evolution or revolution, right? And so I think there's a bit of both, right? So there's evolution in terms of, we're moving into real time and taking advantage of all the great foundational work that's been conducted since 2016 as part of the vision and the agenda of modernization. And there's going to be interesting features and use cases that come out of there, like request to pay. I think that's going to be quite a market changer. But then we're also seeing revolution, right? And so recently, think about the move to crypto and CBDC, right? And lots of volatility, but still I hear right now over 90 central banks are exploring or conducting pilots around digital currencies, right? We've also seen a dramatic shift into embedded finance and something that started as buy now, pay later and installment loans, something that was available for a long time, has just ballooned and brought in some interesting considerations as well. So in our most recent research, which examines exactly that, what's happening in payments beyond 2025 and how to navigate the change of matrix, there are kind of 6 trends that we see. And the first one is around inclusion and trust, right? And so those are themes around, again, financial access, which has traditionally not been a focal point for us in Canada, but nonetheless continues to be challenged in other areas of the world, around the provision of low-cost options, obviously, to ensure that the system runs in a frictionless manner. We talked about digital currencies and about just the amount of activity on it, and it's starting to spiral now into the private sector, right? As banks mobilize to take advantage of what central banks are doing. Digital wallets is another area that we see a lot of traction around, and it really is around integrating things like QR codes and super apps and the ability to move money in a seamless manner. The fourth theme that we see is around the battle of the rails. And so this is all about the fact that the traditional rails in which we've conducted payments are changing, right? And so for us, very specifically in the upcoming future, real-time rail, and I'll touch based on that a little bit later, but the proliferation of account-based payments and the type of disruption that's going to bring into the market, and cross-border payments, another area of immense growth right now. A lot of that is being enabled by ISO 20022 and a little bit of the interoperability gains that we're getting access to. And so, again, unlocking some new and interesting use cases. And then the last one is around fin crime, right? Because with all this proliferation, all this move to digital, look, the fraudsters are smart. They are coming at the same speed, if not faster, and finding pockets of vulnerability. So how do you create a system that is soundproof, right? And lastly, again, on the real-time payment, just really exciting time, more than anything, about the things that it can enable, right? Because then we can get into interesting topics around open banking, around inclusion and choice, and I think it's a real catalyst for us. So very, very excited about that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Edgar. Michelle, welcome. Your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Edgar, the breakdown of the 6 different vision of how it's going to change in 2025 is really impactful. And I think you're seeing that trend. Like, there has been a lot of progress in the last year, and 2022 can be a very impactful year as we look to open banking and have a government mandate to move to an open banking framework in 2023. This is the year that all of the aspects come together to get there. So when we look at digital ID becoming a mandate in December, there's aspects that we need to get to have a wholesome system. Having digital ID, having open banking be a framework that we all work together as an industry to come to with a push from a Bill C-11 or some regulation that can put some framework, some guardrails around the data portability and allow us to kind of catch up to where Australia and the UK, Brazil, Singapore, and many other countries have got to. Because I think when you speak of those 6 initiatives and you talk about inclusivity, you talk about fair pricing, you talk about digital currencies and all of this infrastructure, all 6 of those trends actually really do touch open banking and giving the kind of consumer and SME the power of choice, and having the ability to work with the big banks and have some fintech accessibility in their portfolio, but doing it in a safe and secure way to give their data and have their accounting overview so that they can see where they're saving money and where the opportunities are. And I think just looking at that, 2022 can be a really impactful year. And as we continue to grow, you've seen prepaid actually step up as the innovative rail over the last 3 years, being at the CPPO. We just did a new study, and we've gone from about 4 billion to 5.8 billion in sale, like in top line prepaid. And that's a growth of challenger banks using this as a rail in the interim before all of the different modernization aspects have occurred. So you're seeing ways that Canada is still modernizing in advance. And it's great to see different organizations, credit unions, fintechs, as well as banks start to play around a little bit within the prepaid ecosystem to try and get to those first couple pillars you spoke of, Edgar, in financial inclusion and price perspective. So really excited to what 2022 is going to bring. Thanks, Ryan.
And thank you, Michelle. And last but not least, of course, Andrew, welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, I think for us, 22 is all about our pride in delivery. And if we look back to 21, just quickly, we look at the pride we had with the industry and the regulators to get links in smoothly and successfully for the MT piece. It's all about successful delivery of MX in the latter part of this year. So for us, it's those core infrastructure plays that we get them right. We get them in seamlessly. And to Edgar's point around the battle of the rails, we're going to join that battle with the real-time rail being launched in June 23. And again, we couldn't be more excited for the business transformation opportunities. And to Ryan's point, the role transformation opportunities that's going to bring, the role of the corporate treasurer to have clear and available irrevocable funds available within 60 seconds, and the business transformation opportunities that's going to generate. So we're very focused on that for 22. 22 becomes a key enablement year. The other interesting piece is around speed, Ryan. I think for certain segments, speed is critically important, particularly in the personal space. But when we get into the corporate space, then there's different drivers for that, specifically around data-rich payments. So again, it's going to be interesting to see how those use cases play out as we move through 22. But I think to the other points made, fraud and safety and soundness, the security of our systems is paramount. And from a Payments Canada perspective, that is our number one priority, to ensure that new functionality and existing functionality is safe, sound, and secure, and we have the right level of resilience there. That's really the key theme for us.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Andrew. It's fascinating to sort of hear the responses from people who have been steeped in payments with a lot of experience. And we're definitely at the point, I think, in 2022 where we transition from the theoretical into the practical. And a key element of making that transition into the practical is something Ryan had touched upon earlier, which are the enablers of modern payments. And so I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. And I think a good place to start in terms of those enablers is regulation. So I'm wondering, and we'll start with you, Edgar, how do you see the regulatory environment enabling payment innovation?
Yeah, definitely. And it's a great question, Ryan. When I think about it, if you think of historically Canada and regulation and payments, let's call it, there's not a lot of activity happening. And now there is a lot of activity that previously wasn't there, but it's accelerating. And so, you start with a little bit of the code of conduct around interchange and caps, and what will that do from an innovation perspective, value of rewards and loyalty, and therefore does that create a shift to different channels or not, right? I think those are interesting thoughts. And then you have other legislation like Bill C11, C86 that will potentially have some fundamental impacts on the payment industry, right? And those are still kind of sort of on the adjacency. Now, Michelle, you talked earlier about open banking and the open banking regime, right? So 2023, all about data sharing. 2024 is when we're going to start seeing the exciting piece around writing and payment initiation. And if we see the experience that has transpired in Australia and the UK, really that sweep functionality is what's creating momentum behind open banking. So extremely interesting time. Ryan, you talked earlier about RPAA, and I think I applaud RPAA because it comes into a framework where we start thinking about this open banking kind of regulatory regime and the RPAA. And I often tell my clients, don't think about it as regulation imposed on you and therefore tax type of thing. Is more of a, hey, opportunity to mobilize and identify areas of growth, right? So what the RPA will do is it creates a little bit more soundness around the system, especially because it is the first time that we're moving into activity-based legislation as opposed to entity-based legislation, right? So if you're a participant in the payments ecosystem and you meet certain criteria, you will have to register, you will have to ensure availability of funds, and you will have to have a third-party risk management framework. And I don't want to oversimplify RPAA, but I think it's a great enabler, because then we can start thinking about the big potential for regulatory change, and that's different voices, different positions at the table around the Payments Canada Act, and what does it mean? When will we have open access to the rails? What does that do for innovation and fostering consumer choice? And then you start painting an area that says, wow, as a country, as an economy, and as a society, we were in a position where we're fairly advanced, started lagging a little bit, and this is going to propel us into that next section where we remain competitive with the world and have actually a payments ecosystem that is thought-provoking and fosters innovation. And all of those things are incredibly exciting.
Excellent. Thank you, Edgar. Michelle, when you'd responded about modernization of payments in 2022, I think the regulatory elements came through loud and clear. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on sort of how you see the regulatory environment enabling payments innovation.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan and Edgar. Great points. I think it drives innovation. Fintechs are asking to be regulated. RPAA gave paytechs the opportunity to say, yes, I am compliant, utilize me, let me be a part of the ecosystem within Canada. And I think that's the same aspect of having accreditation for open banking to allow fintechs to play within the ecosystem, but also be checked to ensure that they are ready to play in the ecosystem. And they want this regulation to prove that they're ready. So it's a very odd place, but fintechs are asking for it in the same similar way that paytechs were. And I think it's great that RPAA has made movements and is driving forth, because it sets the ground swell for that competition and that accessibility for fintechs to play within the ecosystem as well. Because when I look to the UK or other markets, they have not only an innovation advantage over Canada at the moment, but they have a VC investment advantage that is happening at almost a 10x to Canadian investment. And even our Canadian VCs are investing outside of Canada because they don't know the regulatory regime that lays in front of their Canadian fintechs. So I'm very passionate about Canada moving forth with regulation that will allow innovation, not over-regulate a market, but regulate it enough to just give it the data portability guardrails to get us to be able to move forward and have the investment dollars that Canadian fintechs and corporations need, so that we can continue, as Edgar said, to be a leader within the world.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. Andrew, welcome your thoughts.
I think for us, Ryan, it's an exciting time. We've talked about access, and access has been a key topic of our SAC in particular for a long period. We're now finally seeing the fruits of that. And we're now seeing, to the points made around the RPAA, but importantly with the changes that we're making to the Canadian Payments Act, and the fact that shortly and almost imminently we're going to see a consultation paper come out on that, and the ability for stakeholders in the ecosystem to provide their views on the changes that should be made to the Canadian Payments Act. But it's going to allow access, and it's going to allow access for credit union locals, for FMIs, and also for PSPs. And I think, to the points made already, the innovation that we're then going to see is going to be critical. We're certainly going to see a lot of new entrants come into the systems. But I think the other thing, Ryan, that's critically important for us is really the safety and soundness aspect. The fact that there will be, like Edgar mentioned, the right levels of control, the registration process with the RPAA functions with the Bank of Canada, the requirements to join Payments Canada as a member, and then to meet the various system requirements. We need to make sure that anyone who joins our systems is safe and sound, and we do protect them. So we're excited. We're excited for the broader access. We've been talking about it for a long time, and I think now we're finally seeing it come into fruition. And we're working closely with our regulators and the government to get that through. We're in the hands of, in some cases, the legislative process, but we're certainly actively working to move as quickly as possible to amend the Canadian Payments Act.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. And Ryan, if you'd like to conclude the topic with your thoughts, please.
Yeah, everyone is making the fabulous points here. What I like to think of is our end client experience in all of this. We can innovate, we can do all of these, but Andrew and folks are absolutely right. If we don't have the regulations that speak to the soundness and security of the systems that we're going to operate, or the innovations that we play on top of our rails, our access, our systems, we end up impacting that client experience, right? Nobody wants to go down a pathway where your client or the experience that you personally have is stifled when you can't, call it, settle for that payment or receive funds because a lack of a security or integrity of a payment system. So that's where we're seeing a lot of, call it, alarm or cause as a relation to cryptos and the exchanges and the corruptions of exchanges. That end client experience is disrupted because maybe there's a lack of trust, or there's an ineffective process in terms of the governance that sits on top of that. So regulations are critical. And I love how Michelle put it, everybody wants a part of this. Everybody wants to be regulated in a certain fashion, not too deep, not too shallow, but get it to the right spot. With that comes the consultation that you're talking about. And this invitation that Andrew is really pointing out in terms of coming up public consultations, everyone participate, because the more voice that's heard, the better that type of regulation can move quicker, because then we don't have multiple iterations going through all the governing bodies, the Department of Finance, House of Commons, all of those. We need to speed up that process. So the more input that we have, the more collaboration we have through our ecosystem, the quicker we can get to a view from the entire ecosystem and move to these regulations quicker. Because we want to move quickly, but we can't just yet. We can't necessarily get there because it takes a lengthy period of time. So how do we overcome that? We collaborate, we combine, we share, and we provide that input into our central body here so that we can try to move this quicker. Without that, we lose some integrity, we lose some security, other entrants start to pop up, that client experience gets impacted when things don't go right. So we're looking to ensure that there's safety, soundness, all of those as the base layer inputs for the acceleration of payment innovation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ryan. It's a fascinating discussion around, some of the building blocks required in order to, establish a beneficial modernized payment system. And I think we'll transition now to some of the benefits that will be delivered upon delivery. I know that as Payments Canada, as a public purpose organization, we do a lot of consultation within the ecosystem. And one of the key benefits that has been flagged by many of the segments that we have interviewed on this is the delivery of data-rich payments. And so moving into that topic, I'm curious as to how you anticipate the data will transform payments within your organization. Wondering, specifically what some of the risks and rewards will be for Canadian consumers and businesses on the whole. And I think on that topic, we'll start with you again, Edgar.
Thank you, Ryan. Fascinating topic, right? Like data is one of those things that is always hot in the market. And when I think about it, the trust around that data is pretty critical, right? And so if we start with ISO 20022 and what that can enable, and I did some work in conjunction with Payments Canada a few years ago, thinking about what are the art of the possible, what are some of the use cases that we can enable, and how is ISO a foundational piece of that. And we're talking about benefits to the Canadian economy in terms of capturing value for businesses, right? And so things like increased STP, automation, ease of reconciliation, ease of liquidity management, and simplification of some of the treasury functions for financial and non-financial institutions. The other part that's kind of interesting is now at the same time, for the first time, speaking with one of my colleagues based in Asia, talks about sunsetting 8583 have started to take place, right? And so there's this kind of monolith data standard messaging that we've been using for a very long time that is finally shifting. And so I think the momentum that ISO 20022 is gaining in the market is it's there. Like it's no longer an aspiration, it's a reality. And with that, then I start thinking about what can be enabled. So one of the interesting use cases is, how can you take payments data to make better credit decisions, right? As a financial institution, and therefore, what type of inclusion, right? And sort of fairness, if you will that bring about in the system, also creating additional soundness because you have a greater deal of data to base some of those decisions on. Now, there's also, it's kind of two sides of the same coin, right? Because all of this data needs to be stored, warehoused, managed, and there's got to be stewardship around it. And so that notion of data trust, right? Like, how do I trust this data to be correct, right? What protocols do I need as an organization in order to protect that data and safeguard it? Especially, we talked a little bit about FinCrime. Data breaches are a hot topic, and as you know, huge reputational impact for the organizations that are impacted by them, and huge societal impact that can be driven from that. So as I start thinking about the amount of data that generates, right, based on transactions, and how that data can be utilized, monetized, and leveraged for better innovation, those are the things that I think become incredibly exciting about what modern payments can be. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Edgar. Michelle, welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, I think going back to the basics of ISO 20022, not many people realize what it can do for them. And I try and bring the analogy of online shopping. So online shopping in the early 2000s, the metadata within that transaction allowed for airlines to have a mall with Macy's, and for all of that data to be succinct, and who was the customer, what was the purchase total, who did they purchase it from, and how do we give them points instantaneously for that transaction. So when you think of the metadata that is going to come in for credit unions, for banks, for fintechs within this infrastructure of the transactions they're doing on a daily basis for their business, what their customers are doing, and then like Edgar said, how do you protect that data? How do you secure that data? And how do you look at that data to help your customers and help offer them products that actually they don't know would be useful for them? And how do you then offer it to them at a price that would be affordable to them, so that you can build a stronger rapport and have a customer in many different facets? So it's a data-rich world that we'll be living in, but we do have to get the guardrails on how do we handle that data. What organizations can credit unions and banks and fintechs partner with that have already found the solutions to protect that data and to look at that data in a way that gives them the insights, but without the stress of just the data itself. So I think it's a really exciting time, and I think it's going to evolve quickly as many markets are ahead of us, and we can definitely learn from them.
Perfect. Great answer. Thank you very much, Michelle. Ryan, welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. The construct here is data is the new constant, right? We're really shifting where data is the center of all aspects that we've got. Payments being one. Another one, and one that we're seeing much more movement, and Edgar alluded to it, is advice. Advice that's offered to clients, whether, if it's merchant side, if it's bank side, whichever side, the ingestion of data on one side, from a client perspective, allows that translation into more usable funds and more usable funds availability, right? As we understand your cash flow, as an algorithm is set where an FI can actually churn this out quicker, you have greater access into your cash flow. That can translate very easily into how you're doing your trade finance, how you're remitting payment globally, right? In terms of the data coming along with it can help shipping move quicker. All of these parts are those critical aspects of what we're going to get through the data, the automation, the cash flow, but really it's that client advice. And whether it's, advice for a retail consumer in terms of, we understand your transaction flow and we recommend this path for you, maybe that's in a digitized fashion, or whether it's for a controller or a corporate finance or somebody in that vein in terms of your liquidity positions, your investment positions, your overnight instruments. All of those have a part to play based on the data and the algorithms that we can provide as an ecosystem. And I completely agree with the comments here, right? You don't have to do this yourself. This can be a partnership. In fact, you probably need a partner. You need somebody that's an expert in data management or ERP integration or the multiple aspects in relation to how your data is managed and your data quality. So partnerships are top of mind. And then the advice and the advisory service that's an outcome are very interesting avenues for how we can start to provide greater experiences across our globe.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ryan. And Andrew.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting from a Payments Canada perspective. We hold very little data centrally at this point in time. So I think what we are critically focused on is making sure that we have the interoperability between our systems, that the data standards between links and RTR as consistent as possible. We're certainly very keen on making sure that that's a critical function for us going forward around that interoperability piece. But to the points made by the other panelists, I think, and very well made, I think the business transformation opportunities that we see, for end users, and the ability, as Edgar said quite eloquently, for straight-through processing, efficiencies within businesses, cash flow, liquidity, etc., I think are critical, and that's something that we're very keen to be an enabler of. So I think, Ryan, we're certainly going to see very strong benefits for the ecosystem. But I think the other thing that I think is probably lacking at this point in time is really something around ISO education, and how do we and the industry help to talk to corporates and businesses about the benefits that can be generated. Is there some ambivalence at this point in time or a lack of knowledge around that? So how do we help educate end users about the benefits of ISO, the potential use cases, and the transformative capabilities they can bring into their business? So Payments Canada will be delighted to help in that fashion, but the industry certainly will drive that strongly with their customer base.
Beautiful. Thank you, Andrew. And it's true. I mean, as people who are kind of, immersed in payments day to day, it's one thing for us to talk about the benefits of modernization, but I think many of us realize that when we sort of go back into our families or our social circles and you talk about payments modernization, the end benefits aren't necessarily as clear to people who are sort of the end user consumers and businesses. So, I think along those lines, before we open up the floor to questions coming from the audience, I'd like to pull back the lens just a little bit, on modern payments and talk a little bit about what, all of the developments that, we've been talking about, that are exciting for the payments ecosystem. What do these things mean, more broadly for Canadian businesses and consumers? Andrew, you talked about an ISO 20022, education piece. And really, how do we crystallize the benefits? How do we turn the sort of, art of the possible into sort of real tangible reality and benefits, and really sort of galvanize and mobilize the ecosystem in terms of what the end user benefits will be? So, again, Andrew, love to start with you in terms of what, what these changes mean more broadly for the ecosystem.
Yeah. And I think for us, Ryan, we are laser focused on the fact that the RTR is coming. It's going to move from a project that we've talked about for a long period of time and a lot of people have worked very hard on, to a project that's going to reach its fruition in June 23. Geez, if I got my date right, that'd be good. So June 23. So we're less than 100 days away from the end of build. We're moving into integrated testing. So this is becoming very real very quickly. The other thing, we have a sandbox sitting there ready, available for use, so people can happily join up and sign into the sandbox and start testing their APIs. So this is functionality that's becoming real. It's coming at the market very quickly. And we certainly are going to welcome the innovation that we're going to see in the broader ecosystem. So fast, frictionless, secure payment options are going to be coming to market. How do businesses now take that opportunity and transform? How do they start thinking about fast, irrevocable and clear and available funds within 60 seconds? And how do businesses start thinking about the transformation opportunities that brings to their business? So we've been talking to small businesses, we've been talking to large corporates about the kind of changes we can see at point of sale, the kind of changes we're going to see for liquidity management for small business. And I think, Ryan, for us, that narrative becomes very exciting. But our job with industry and with regulators is to make sure that we land the RTR, and we are laser focused on that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Andrew. Ryan, welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. All of the footprints that we're setting, all of this, what does it actually mean for that end state, right? Like, on the consumer basis, I've talked about advice and the types of relative advice that we can offer you, right? When we understand your transaction and we understand your transaction flow, take an example of, we would see something on your credit card statement that is in a different currency than you're currently at. Right, that's a simple advisory capacity where we could offer a foreign exchange, a forward hedge, any kind of construct, and then do an automation of the remittance of payments. There are nuances that can happen within that in terms of the advice that we offer. What I think we will start to see in terms of the consumer behavior is really the payment structure starting to move into the background, right? With the real-time rail coming, faster payments, we will start to see a change in the behaviors of real-time funds availability. So that in that example where I am late with my bill payment to pick one of the telcos and they're going to cut off my services, 2 or 3 days in an EDI fashion doesn't really work quite well for me. A real-time payment is a real avenue in terms of ensuring that I have the payment made on time, or ensuring that the receiver of that payment is giving me fair and quick value for it. So that rapid movement that we're seeing in relation to real-time payments is going to translate into great usability for the consumer. And I do think that, if we're going to go down some roads here in terms of we all become tokens at some point, and then we have funds availability and QR and those types of avenues, but that spur of innovation in relation to not just tap, but QR, all of that data rights and policy, so that I can seamlessly move around this planet, or even in our nation, tap my phone, tap my wallet, whatever those fashions start to become, and have my choice and preference. We're going to see all of those innovations even further accelerate. Peer-to-peer type of payments in terms of QRs or exchange of value is going to accelerate as a relation to real-time settlement and the constructs that we're all developing here. The simple, I have my card on file, why do I need to bother, right? That dynamic starts to change. And how does that dynamic start to change in relation to what reward or what benefit am I using or am I getting in relation to all of these other types of rails? Right now, I get great benefits from a card on file. Do I get the same type of benefit if I'm at a merchant and I'm using a tap transaction, or I'm using it directly from my deposit account or some construct like that? So I think they're going to see a lot of innovation in that space, in particular in terms of reward loyalty, governing the type of payment structure that a consumer will undertake. On the business side, Andrew's pointed it out very well in terms of the automation that we're going to see, that efficiency, but really that change in process and the speed at which we're going to get to. Andrew's called out, irrevocable payment. That's a critical one in terms of cross-border trade and the financial aspect that's needed in terms of the exchanges of value. So fund finality is going to make a dramatic difference. Efficiency, we've talked about it throughout our conversation here in terms of that changing landscape, the ERP type of integration, that elevation, like I spoke earlier, in terms of micro to macro. Now I've got a global oversight of all my financials, all of my cash flow, all of that. And I'm moving my brain to start thinking about other aspects in terms of how do I manage my liquidity? How do I manage other areas versus the laborious task of ensuring payments are structured, ensuring data is merged in. So that alignment that Andrew's talking about in terms of ubiquity of standards across our globe is going to be critical. So the education of ISO, the education for all of the businesses in terms of what does it actually mean and how do I use it, how do I bring it in, is going to be critical for us over the next number of years as we continue to ramp up. And I wouldn't be surprised at all for an innovative player to come in or continue to come in terms of massaging that type of interaction between the book of record, so to speak, and the types of ERPs or softwares that you're using to run your business. It's happening already. So really great momentum, and I think that we're going to see great value for consumers and great value for businesses. And the hope is that the businesses translate that value back to the consumer, whether it's price points or advice, or whether it's just in terms of the overall experiences. We're going to see it all collide very quickly here.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ryan. Michelle, I'd like to pick up where Ryan left off.
Yeah, Ryan and Andrew covered so much. I think from a consumer and a business standpoint, I am a business. And I think when I look at the advantages of, some other markets that they have due to open banking, due to open data, I'm looking forward to our 98% businesses. Like if you look at Canadians' landscape, we are 98% of our entire businesses are small to medium-sized businesses. So when you look at what ISO can do for them from a cash flow management, when you look at what open banking can do for them so that they can gather all of their accounting, all of their bills into one place in a secure way without breaching their bank agreements to get access to the data they need to have one picture of how their accounting infrastructure is and how much time that will save them or money in the sense of accounting to facilitate that view. And then to, have a POS system that does real-time payments so that they don't have to settle. Some people are settling in 3 days or 5 days or next day, but instantaneous is a whole other game for our small to medium-sized businesses. So I think there's so much available to them in advantages, but like normal consumers, tap to pay wasn't something they wanted or needed until the pandemic came about. And thank goodness Canada was here first in 2015 and had EMV, had all of our chip enablement so that we could tap to pay. But the pickup came when people didn't want to touch a terminal. So I think you're seeing a lot of that tap to pay card and wallet infrastructure being very utilized over the last 2 years and will continue to be utilized. So we are getting much closer to that QR payment interaction play, largely because people had to use QRs to get menus throughout the pandemic. So you're getting user acceptance due to it being part of their day-to-day lives. So I think it's about making sure that they're going to use it as long as the functionality is accessible to them, and as long as we could explain it to them in a way that they take advantage of what's available to them at the same time.
That's great. Thank you very much, Michelle. Edgar, we'll close out the topic with your comments.
Yeah, the tough act to follow. Look, great answers there. I fundamentally agree with some of the topics that Michelle brought about, right? So I think some of the greatest opportunities are around how the core of our economy, which is businesses, right? Small to medium-sized businesses, can take advantage of these changes, right? And it's in terms of innovation, it's in terms of ease and just the ability to empower entrepreneurs to not have to worry about how to handle payments, but to have that seamlessly integrated into their journeys, right? And so if you start extending that thought into the possibilities that data-rich payments, fast finality of settlement payments enable in terms of an ecosystem of value, and how you, under an open banking regime, can start onboarding different players that can add, that can value add at every step of the chain, that creates a really interesting proposition. And for me, the exciting part is, what does that do for us as a global economy? How does that improve our competitive position in the world in terms of our balance of trade? And does that mean we start attracting even more talent and creating more innovation in the tech space, right? And so it's a very exciting set of possibilities. And then you start thinking about what comes next, right? And so we've heard about the metaverse right now. The last sort of quarter, 200 CEOs have talked about their plans about the metaverse, right? Digitally native, crypto wallets are going to be reigning there. But then you start thinking about, well, what's the role that traditional money exchange will play in the metaverse? And look, I think it's still a polarizing topic. Some people think it's, out there, don't understand it, and other people are fully immersed and bought into it. But the point of this convergence between the digital and the real world, the lines continue to blur, and our ability to move money in and out of another one into the other will be critical. And we couldn't do that without some of the foundational elements that have been established as of recent. So I think that's, from a societal perspective, as a Canadian, I'm excited about some of those things that are coming up.
Excellent. Thank you, Edgar. It's fascinating to watch people who are passionate about payments, start to riff on the subject. I should actually, keep it and save it rather than coffee. This will kind of be what motivates me and inspires me to get up, for the day. But some really interesting, themes that came out of that, obviously, in terms of payments almost disappearing into the background and just becoming a seamless process. And I think a lot of the discussion around how it's going to enable small business to get back on its feet. Edgar, a few times you'd sort of brought up, inclusion. Ryan, you talked a little bit about how we're going to enhance the consumer experience by pushing advice. There's a lot of, benefits, really exciting. And again, thanks to our panelists here for helping to sort of really paint the picture as to how modernized payments will benefit, end user Canadians. It appears as though I'm not the only one who was, somewhat inspired by your, by the thoughts that have been shared here today, because we've got quite a few questions coming in. And so, Michelle, the first one I'm gonna sort of start with you, and I'll let you know in advance, so I'm not asking the question and springing it on you. So Michelle, you're up first. Question is, do you think that you will see more payment gateway startups coming in within the Canadian payments ecosystem?
Yeah, I think there's many trying from that perspective, but I think Canadians like things that are very accessible to them, right? And a brand that they know. We know from many surveys that Canadians are loyalists. We like one telco, we use that telco. We like one bank, we use that bank. But the interesting thing that I found over the pandemic is many Canadians will definitely stay with their bank, but they will diversify amongst other offerings. Like they'll pick up a Wave accounting system. They'll pick up an EQ bank account for some aspects of their business and so on. So yes, I do, but I think it has to somehow still have a part of Canada. So they're going to have to find partnerships to facilitate a win and really get to know the Canadian ecosystem from that perspective. So, and there's going to have to be the regulatory play for it to come in safely.
Thanks, Michelle. And of course, these questions, we don't have sort of exclusive rights of response for the first person pointed out. So if any of the other panelists want to provide any thoughts around whether or not we'll see more payment gateway startups within the Canadian ecosystem, I'll welcome your thoughts on that topic as well. Or we can move on to the next question. So the next question, Edgar, this one's coming your way. Do you think that identity verification platforms that work globally and in multiple jurisdictions can help drive value for businesses and users?
Very, very interesting question. Short answer is absolutely. And, when we spoke about earlier in the last question of the panel around the benefits to society and the benefits to Canadians, one thing that I was remiss about not mentioning is ESG, right? And so this concept of it's not just about my money and how I move it, but about who I am and what I believe in and the causes that I'm passionate about supporting, or the fact that I want to deal with companies that are respectful and mindful of their ESG goals, right? When you combine the benefits of a modern payment infrastructure with the benefits of at scale digital verification, that ability to track the data and verify, right, both as a person and as a business, starts getting some really interesting applications. And so I think that is absolutely things that are going to start merging, right? Digital identity verification, the ability to have that sort of open ecosystem that's powered by APIs and the ability to access others in the ecosystem, and then a transparent flow of money that is done on modern infrastructure will unlock a lot of interesting altruistic causes, as well as the ability to verify trust in the fact that what you're declaring is in fact true.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Edgar. I think
Ryan, Ryan, I think that there's a bit more, even just beyond identity as call it a central utility, right? Or a global aspect. We could look at other forms of utilities that would empower our ecosystem to have a more safe and secure fashion, right? Think of a fraud management or a fraud landscape at the center, right? And what does that type of global utility start to mean? Can we move payments faster by nature of having something at the center in terms of not just your identity and authentication, but also fraud scoring and other types of riskier transactions? So it's big, and I think that we can get to some form of ubiquity, certainly within Canada, hopefully more globally.
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan. I'll take the pause as my cue to move on to the next question. Andrew, this one is coming your way. So like the way this one starts out, RTR will be great. With faster payments comes faster fraud. So how does Payments Canada envision the collaboration between partners to monitor activities?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a key challenge that we're very conscious of. We've seen it globally, and I think that's probably the first part to the answer. We've been engaging with other global networks to understand their fraud experiences from day one, to make sure that we don't have the same concerns in Canada when we launch. I think the other thing, Ryan, is we've specifically stood up a modernization fraud steering committee to make sure that we're engaging with partners and the ecosystem to make sure that we've got the right steps in place, the right rules in place, the right policies in place, but also the right tools in place. So to Ryan's point, we're seeing a mobilization of the ecosystem, which is critically important, and there will certainly be movement on the fraud side. But I think the other thing, Ryan, is preparedness. It's making sure that we have the RTR sandbox ready now. People can start testing their APIs and the like. So it's really starting to get ready and prepared. And the more prepared we are, then hopefully we will see less fraud day one. But we are very conscious of it and something we are actively addressing.
And if I can just add to that, Andrew, because I think you're absolutely right. Our experience in all other jurisdictions has led to a sort of accelerated fraud post-implementation of the faster payment system. What I think is interesting is also the compounding effect that you can have by bringing together some of the methodologies, tools, et cetera, that all the agents in the value chain can bring to bear, right? And so through overlay services, that can actually become quite an impactful thing to proof the system. I know it's going to take some trial and error and learning and lessons to implement that, but the compounding effect is what I think will be critical.
Excellent. Thank you, Edgar. Lots of questions tumbling in. It's a moderator's dream here. Next question's coming for you, Ryan. It is, will participating in this space require corporates to completely overhaul or replace legacy systems? That could be a huge roadblock to moving forward.
Well, the word completely is a bit nebulous. Any one of the, call it treasury workstations or softwares that are being used, you're relatively out of date after you've done the last patch. So I think reliance on your provider to have the latest capacities is critical. Will it need a major overhaul? Likely, right? ISO and the standards that come with ISO 2022 are big. They're broad. They would dig deep into your ERPs to gather, call it invoice data, gather all the data elements that need to be bound up into the payment and sent over to the FI. When you're collaborating with your FI in terms of, call it your financials and remittance of your financials, there's going to be, call it a consumption of an API, right? Edgar talked about the API and the new futures, but how do we connect? Like, how do we offer this? So there are options, right? You continue to upgrade your current legacy systems to the point where they are potentially unsupported. Then you do a massive overhaul. Also, there might be translation services. There's going to be innovative tech partners that are going to create translation services that could allow you to, call it, piggyback for a period of time until you have a, call it, if it's funds or a maturity in your organization to get to that point where you're consuming it. But most certainly there will be an adjustment, right? Just taking it, and whether your FI or partner provides you an easier way to consume that, I think that's probably the first stage. But likely, given a sufficient time, you're going to have to at some point do that upgrade. But I think you can manage effectively with translation services and what offerings might be available from your partner FI or other partner in terms of consumption of APIs.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan.
Ryan, just to jump in there as well. I mean, we've also seen, we have so many multinationals here within Canada, and a lot of them have already experienced data-rich payments and ISO and have already made fundamental changes to their corporate accounting systems and the like. We have a number of package providers that have already upgraded their packages. So I think, completely overhaul, to Ryan's point, is nebulous. I think there are already changes being made that people can leverage. And I think the question is, how much bespoke change do they need to make specifically for the Canadian piece? But otherwise, I think that there's good progress already being made.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew. And we'll leave the microphone with you for our final question of the day. So, Andrew, can the members of the panel or Payments Canada in particular give us a more detail about the schedule of ISO 20022 adoption in Canada? When does Payments Canada see cutting over entirely to the new standard and consequently dropping the old standards?
Certainly the goal of the Links MX piece in November of this year is to certainly make sure that we're introducing the ISO standards for the Links system specifically. And then from June 23, when we launch the RTR, that will be full ISO enabled. In terms of the legacy payment message, Ryan, I'm not sure of the exact date on that. We can clarify that for the audience at some point, but certainly our goal is to make sure that in June 23 for the RTR, it will be fully ISO enabled, and from November 22 for the Links MX system.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew. And of course, at Payments Canada, we do pride ourselves as being connectors and collaborators within the payments ecosystem. So to Andrew's point, I would invite everyone here to sort of, bookmark payments.ca for updates on subjects such as that one, as well as others. So much appreciated. Thank you, Andrew. So we're at the top of the hour, and honestly, I can't. Words can't really capture how much I'd like to thank the panelists here today. It's been a fantastic conversation, invigorating, inspirational, just a wealth of expertise, knowledge and passion that's sort of come through. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have the conversation with all of you and as well as all of you who joined us. Really great way to kick off the Summit Series here for 2022. Speaking of which, our next Summit Series webinar will be held on March the 10th. And the topic will be partnership in payments. So we're definitely looking forward to continue the discussion on the future of payments. And of course, I would be remiss in not putting a serious plug in for the 2022 Payments Canada Summit, which will be taking place virtually a little earlier this year. It's coming between April 26th and the 28th. And again, payments.ca can provide all details on that, but obviously we would very much appreciate your participation in the summit and know that you would not be disappointed by the breadth and depth of thought leadership that will be exhibited as part of that event. So once again, thank you everybody, those of you who are joining us for your participation and your engagement, and of course once again to our esteemed group of panelists here that were able to provide us with tremendous insights and and some commentary around modernized payments. So thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe. Have a lovely rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you again March 10th. Take care.